determined that the men lie with me. Some is not true of my evils, but it is all. I had a vision. I did. In my mind, became truth. An idea took shape. Inevitable. Unavoidable. Feel life. Until it. Seek. I must confess, I never considered what would come after great victory. And
the great Victor Frankenstein. A mistake. Stein. You made
not something. Someone. This was
What happens when a legend is reborn for a new generation? Frankenstein, 2025, brings the classic monster back with a darker, more emotional twist, and in this video on JS Beatline Story, I break down the full movie review along with shocking facts, hidden meanings, and details you might have missed. From its powerful performances to the modern themes behind the horror, this is not just a movie, it's a warning, and a story you need to understand. Frankenstein is a 2025 American Gothic science fiction drama film produced, written, and directed by Guillermo del Toro. The movie is based on the famous 1818 novel by Mary Shelley. Oscar Isaac plays Victor Frankenstein, while Jacob Elordi appears as the creature. The supporting cast includes Mia Goth and Christoph Waltz. The story focuses on the life of Victor Frankenstein, a proud and self-centered scientist whose attempt to create new life leads to frightening and dangerous results that he cannot control. Guillermo del Toro had dreamed of making a faithful Frankenstein film for many years and often described it as his passion project. At first, the film was being developed at Universal Pictures. During that time, del Toro planned to cast his frequent collaborator Doug Jones as the creature, and legendary artist Bernie Wrightson was being considered to design the monster. However, Universal later paused the project due to changes connected to its Dark Universe plans. In 2023, Netflix brought the project back to life, with Jacob Elordi taking on the role of the creature instead. Filming took place from February to September 2024. Although Bernie Wrightson passed away in 2017, his illustrated book Bernie Wrightson's Frankenstein became a major visual inspiration for the film. Frankenstein premiered at the 82nd Venice International Film Festival on August 30, 2025. After its festival debut, the film was released by Netflix. It had a limited theatrical release in the United States starting on October 17, followed by a worldwide release on Netflix on November 7. The movie received mostly positive reviews from critics, who praised its direction, performances, and emotional depth. It was also recognized by major film organizations, with both the National Board of Review and the American Film Institute naming it among the top 10 films of 2025. In addition, the film earned 5 nominations at the 83rd Golden Globe Awards, including Best in 1857. A Royal Danish Navy ship called Horisont is sailing toward the North Pole when it becomes trapped in thick ice. After hearing an explosion in the distance, Captain Anderson and his crew discover a badly injured man in the frozen wasteland. They bring him aboard and learn that he is Victor Frankenstein. Soon after, a terrifying creature attacks the ship and demands that Victor be handed over to him. Captain Anderson uses a blunderbuss to shoot the creature, sending it sinking into the icy water. Victor then reveals to the crew that he is the one who created the creature. Part 1. Victor's Tale. Victor's story begins with the death of his mother, who dies while giving birth to his younger brother, William. William becomes the favorite child of their wealthy and famous father, a respected surgeon. Victor grows up grieving his mother's death and resenting his cold, abusive father. Despite this, he becomes a brilliant but arrogant surgeon, driven by an obsession to defeat death itself through science. His experiments go too far, and he is expelled from the Royal College of Surgeons of Edinburgh after being accused of reanimating dead bodies, an act the tribunal condemns as deeply immoral. Victor is later approached by Henrik Harlander, a powerful arms dealer who offers him endless financial support and a remote tower where he can continue his work in secret. Victor accepts and brings William to help him build a laboratory. During this time, Victor becomes attracted to Elizabeth, William's fiancée tilde copywritee and Harlander's niece, but she rejects his advances. Using body parts taken from executed criminals and soldiers killed in the Crimean War, Victor builds a body meant to be brought back to life. Harlander, who is dying from syphilis, demands that his brain be placed inside the creature so he can live on. Victor refuses, and in his anger, Harlander sabotages the experiment and falls to his death. Although lightning strikes the creature as planned, the laboratory is destroyed in the process. The next morning, Victor discovers that the creature is alive. He is amazed by its incredible strength and its ability to heal quickly, but he can only teach it to say one word: Victor. As time passes, Victor grows frustrated with the creature's slow mental development and begins treating it with the same cruelty he once suffered from his father. He almost becomes afraid of the creature's physical power. When William and Elizabeth visit, Elizabeth questions Victor's harsh treatment and shows kindness to the creature, even teaching it to say her name. Victor tells William that the creature killed Harlander and sends him and Elizabeth away. He then sets the laboratory on fire with the creature trapped inside. Hearing the creature cry out his name, Victor tries to go back and save it, but the tower explodes, badly injuring his leg. As Victor finishes telling his story aboard the ship, the creature appears, confronts Captain Anderson, and begins to share his own version of events. Part 2. The Creature's Tale. The creature survives the explosion and hides inside the machinery of a mill on a nearby farm. Over the course of a year, he secretly helps the family living there by gathering firewood and building a shelter for their sheep. The family, unaware of his presence, thank their mysterious helper and call it the spirit of the forest. When the family leaves to hunt wolves in the mountains, the creature befriends the blind father who remains behind. The old man teaches him how to read and speak properly. Later, the creature travels back to the ruins of Victor's laboratory, where he learns the truth about how he was created and finds the location of Victor's estate. When he returns to the farm, he finds the blind man being attacked by wolves. The creature saves him and comforts him as he dies, but when the hunters return, they wrongly believe the creature killed the man and shoot him. After recovering, the creature realizes that he cannot die and will be forced to live forever in loneliness. He confronts Victor during William and Elizabeth's wedding and demands that Victor create a companion for him. Victor refuses, fearing that the creature could reproduce and create more monsters. Enraged, the creature attacks him. Elizabeth tries to protect the creature by embracing him, but Victor attempts to shoot and accidentally kills Elizabeth instead. William is also wounded while trying to stop the creature, and before dying, he calls Victor the real monster. The creature carries Elizabeth's body to a cave, where she dies in his arms. Victor chases the creature into the Arctic, driven by guilt and revenge. The creature attempts to kill himself using dynamite, but even that fails. In the end, Victor and the creature reconcile, calling each other father and son. Victor finally dies from his injuries. The creature frees the ship from the ice, and Captain Anderson chooses to stop the pursuit and return home. Left alone, the creature reaches out toward the sunlight, remembering the wonder of life that Victor once tried to teach him. The casting for Guillermo del Toro's 2025 adaptation of Frankenstein represents a meticulous blend of star power, emerging talent, and veteran performers, each chosen to embody the gothic horror and emotional depth of Mary Shelley's timeless novel. Del Toro, known for his visually sumptuous and thematically rich films, approached the casting with a focus on actors who could convey inner turmoil through subtle expressions, particularly emphasizing the importance of their eyes as windows to the characters' souls. This philosophy guided the selection process, ensuring that the ensemble not only honored the source material but also brought fresh interpretations to iconic roles. The project, long gestating in Del Toro's mind since 2007, saw its casting evolve through multiple iterations, influenced by scheduling conflicts, creative visions, and serendipitous recommendations. Oscar Isaac's selection as Baron Victor Frankenstein marked a pivotal moment in the film's development. Isaac, with his brooding intensity and proven range, was an early lock for the role, bringing a punk rock edge to the character that reimagines the scientist as a misunderstood artist rather than a mere madman. Del Toro highlighted Isaac's eyes as essential for portraying Victor's tortured nobility, noting that they convey a man who believes he's pursuing good while descending into hubris. Isaac's preparation involved delving into the character's obsessive nature, viewing Victor's lab as a stage for performance art, which added layers of provocation and arrogance to the portrayal. His filmography, spanning introspective dramas like Inside Landavisa, where he earned acclaim for his portrayal of a struggling musician, to blockbuster roles in the Star Wars sequels and Dune, equipped him to handle Victor's emotional complexity. In interviews, Isaac described the role as fueling his own artistic provocations, drawing parallels between Victor's experiments and the risks actors take in transformative performances. The casting announcement in early 2023 came amid buzz following Del Toro's Oscar win for Pinocchio, positioning Isaac as the anchor for a narrative that explores creation, regret, and familial strife. Complementing Isaac as Jacob Elordi as the creature, a casting choice that emerged from necessity but proved transformative. Initially, Andrew Garfield was slated for the role, with designs tailored to his physique. After discussions in 2023, however, scheduling conflicts from the SAG-AFTRA strike forced a recast in January 2024. Elordi, recommended by a hairstylist from his work on Priscilla, stepped in, prompting a complete redesign of the creature's appearance in just 9 weeks to accommodate his taller frame. Del Toro praised Elordi's innocent eyes, crucial for humanizing the monster and evoking sympathy amid his grotesque form. Elordi's performance draws on the creature's rapid healing and immense strength, but more importantly, his journey from inarticulate being to eloquent seeker of companionship. Elordi's rise from teen dramas like The Kissing Booth to nuanced roles in Euphoria, Saltburn, earning a BAFTA nomination, and Priscilla showcased his ability to blend vulnerability with menace. He described the experience as nothing short of a religious experience, immersing himself in prosthetics and movement coaching to capture the creature's isolation. This casting shift not only refreshed the project's energy but also aligned with Del Toro's vision of the creature as a Miltonian tragic figure, inspired by Bernie Wrightson's illustrations. Mia Goth's dual roles as Lady Elizabeth Herlander and Baroness Clara Frankenstein add a layer of psychological intrigue to the casting. Goth, portraying both Victor's unspoken love interest betrothed to his brother Williama and his late mother, embodies the film's themes of loss and desire. Del Toro cast her for her ability to convey authenticity in quiet moments, with Goth finding connection through the elaborate costumes that helped her align with Elizabeth's poised yet conflicted nature. She noted parallels between her own experiences and the characters, allowing for an organic performance. Goth's history with duo roles in T. West's X trilogy, X, Pearl, Moxxine, prepared her for this challenge, where she shifts between the nurturing Claire, whose death shatters the Frankenstein family, and the bewitching Elizabeth, who forms a bond with the creature. Her previous works in horror like A Cure for Wellness and Infinity Pool highlight her knack for unsettling yet empathetic portrayals, making her ideal for Del Toro's gothic aesthetic. The announcement of her involvement in 2023 fueled speculation about her roles, with Del Toro tweaking the script to emphasize her character's emotional ties to Victor and the creature. Felix Kammerer brings a grounded warmth to William Frankenstein, Victor's younger brother and the family's golden child. Kammerer's casting drew from Del Toro's personal anecdotes about sibling dynamics, infusing the role with biographical undertones. As the fiancé tilde copyright to Elizabeth, William represents the stability Victor lacks, yet his fate underscores the tragedy of familial bonds. Kammerer's breakout in the Oscar-winning All Quiet on the Western Front demonstrated his ability to portray innocence amid chaos, a quality Del Toro sought for William's reunion with Victor. Joined in January 2024, Kammerer's Austrian background added an international flavor to the ensemble, enhancing the film's 19th century European setting. His preparation involved exploring the script's semi-autobiographical elements, creating a performance that balances admiration for Victor with growing horror at his actions. Christoph Waltz's role as Henrik Harlander, the arms merchant funding Victor's experiments, injects moral ambiguity and intrigue. Waltz, a two-time Oscar winner for Inglourious Basterds and Django Unchained, was added in September 2023, collaborating with Del Toro to evolve the character on set. Harlander's motive as subsidizing art through wartime profiteering mirror real historical figures, and Waltz described the process as a living one, allowing for improvisations that deepened his portrayal. Del Toro valued Waltz's versatility, seen in films like The French Dispatch and his voice work in Pinocchio, to portray a patron whose support turns sinister. This casting choice elevates the film's exploration of ethics in science, with Waltz's charismatic menace contrasting Isaac's fervent idealism. Christian Convery's portrayal of young Victor Frankenstein at age 10 captures the character's formative traumas under an abusive father. Del Toro described young Victor as arrogant yet tender, shaped by sociopathic parenting. Convery, known for his breakout in Sweet Tooth as the hybrid Gus, brings a childlike intensity to the role, drawing from films like Cocaine Bear and upcoming projects like Flowervale Street. Cast in early 2024, Convery's performance sets the stage for Isaac's adult Victor, highlighting the cycle of cruelty that propels the narrative. Charles Dance embodies Baron Leopold Frankenstein, Victor's oppressive father, whose cold control sows the seeds of his son's obsession. Dance, iconic as Tywin Lannister in Game of Thrones, was cast for his commanding presence, reprising paternal authority from 2015's Victor Frankenstein. His extensive resume, including Gosford Park and The Crown, allows him to infuse Leopold with subtle tyranny, influencing the brothers' paths. Announced alongside other supporting roles, Dance's involvement adds gravitas to the family drama. Lars Mikkelsen as Captain Anderson, the Arctic stranded ship captain who hears Victor's tale, provides a framing device for the story. Mikkelsen's Danish heritage suits the character's naval background, and his roles in The Witcher and Ahsoka showcase his ability to convey stoic empathy. Cast in 2024, he anchors the prelude, confronting Victor and the creature in a tense standoff. David Bradley's blind man, who befriends and educates the creature, is a poignant role emphasizing themes of humanity. Bradley, a Del Toro regular from Pinocchio, as Geppetto, and The Strain, was chosen for his warmth, seen in Harry Potter as Argus Filch and Game of Thrones. His casting underscores the creature's quest for acceptance, with Bradley's performance drawing on his stage roots for emotional depth. Ralph Ensign joins as Professor Crumpy in a pivotal cameo, announced in April 2024. Ensign's gravelly voice and presence from The Witch and The Green Knight make him suited for the academic who expels Victor, adding tension to the early plot. Bern Gorman appears as an executioner, sourcing body parts for Victor's experiments. Gorman's roles in Pacific Rim, with Del Toro, and The Dark Knight Rises bring a gritty edge to this minor but crucial part. Nikolaj Lykos as Chief Officer Larson supports the naval framing, his Danish film background enhancing authenticity. The ensemble extends to minor roles that enrich the film's world. Lauren Collins as a farmhand in the creature's hiding sequence, Sophia Galasso in a village scene, and Kyle Gatehouse as a lab assistant all contribute to the atmospheric detail. Uncredited extras like Matthew Barr as a museum patron, Liam Bell as Herlander's footman, and Christopher Brown as a market shopper populate the bustling 19th century settings, with many selected through background casting by Zaimrit Kleiman and Louise Mason. These roles, though small, were cast with care to reflect diverse period authenticity, involving fittings and breakdowns to match Del Toro's visual style. The casting process faced challenges, including the SAG-AFTRA strike that delayed filming from summer 2023 to February 2024, leading to Garfield's exit and Elordi's entry. Del Toro's initial 2008 plans at Universal involved Doug Jones as the creature, but the project shifted to Netflix post-Pinocchio success. Inspirations from Frank Darabont's script and Wrightson's art-guided selections, with Del Toro prioritizing actors who could embody a Latin American Catholic perspective on creation and sin. Announcements rolled out gradually: Isaac, Goth, and initial Garfield in 2023, followed by Elordi, Waltz, and others in 2024. Movement coaches like Roberto Campanella and intimacy coordinator Vanessa Coffey ensured safe, authentic performances, particularly for Elordi's prosthetics-heavy role. Comparisons to past adaptations highlight this casting's innovation. Unlike Boris Karloff's mute monster in 1931's Frankenstein, Elordi's creature is eloquent, echoing the novel's philosophical depth. Isaac's rock star Victor contrasts Colin Clive's hysteria, while Goth's dual roles expand on Elizabeth's agency beyond May Clark's version. Waltz's Harlander introduces a new antagonist dynamic, absent in earlier films, and Dance's Leopold evokes the tyrannical fathers in Shelley's text but amplified for screen. Cameras will demand sibling rivalry not as prominent in Kenneth Branagh's 1994 take, where Aidan Quinn played a similar role. Bradley's Blind Man nods to Gene Hackman's in Branagh's film but with more educational focus. This ensemble avoids camp, favoring emotional realism, setting Del Toro's version apart from Universal's monster mashups. Del Toro's emphasis on Isaac extended to the entire cast, from Convery's youthful gaze capturing Victor's innocence lost to McKelson's steely resolve as Anderson. Casting associates like Ashley Gray and Jonathan Oliveira scouted talent, with dance casting by Louise Mason for sequences like The Wedding. The international mix Austrian camera, Danish McKelson, Australian Elordi mirrors the novel's European wanderings, enhancing cultural texture. Behind the scenes, actors like Isaac and Elordi bonded over the makeup process, with Elordi's transformation taking hours daily, fostering a collaborative set atmosphere. Supporting performers like Joachim Pflstrup as a sailor, Peter Millard in a lab scene, and Peter McNeil as a villager add subtle layers. Uncredited roles, such as Mark Burns as a butcher or Sharon Canovas as a looter, were filled through extensive extras casting, ensuring crowded markets and riots feel lived in. This attention to detail in minor casting underscores Del Toro's world building, where even background figures contribute to the Gothic immersion. The production's Toronto base, with reshoots in Scotland, influenced local talent inclusion, like Canadian actors Lauren Collins and Kyle Gatehouse. Challenges like redesigning for Elordi tested the team's adaptability, but resulted in a more imposing creature that amplifies themes of otherness. Del Toro's history with actor Waltz from Pinocchio voice work, Bradley from multiple projects built trust, allowing for script tweaks that enhanced performances. In exploring suitability, Isaac's experience with morally complex characters in Ex Machina parallels Victor's God complex. Elordi's physicality from Saltburn suits the creature's strength, while his euphoria vulnerability captures loneliness. Goth's horror pedigree ensures her roles resonate with dread and empathy. Waltz's charm masks Harlander's villainy, much like his Tarantino roles. Dance's authoritative screen presence makes Leopold's abuse palpable, influencing Victor's arc. Announcements generated hype. Netflix's Tudum breakdowns detailed roles, with trailers showcasing Elordi's makeup. Fan reactions praise the fresh take, comparing favorably to 1931's cast to Colin Clive, Boris Karloff while noting modern diversity. This casting not only revives Shelley's critique of ambition but infuses it with contemporary relevance through performers who embody psychological depth. Ensemble dynamics shine in interactions. Isaac and Elordi's father-son reconciliation, Goth's bonds with both, Camera's fraternal tension. Minor roles like David Bradley's mentorship scene with Elordi provide emotional pivots, cast for their ability to evoke compassion. Ultimately, the casting reflects Del Toro's passion, blending stars like Isaac with risers like Elordi, veterans like Dance, and specialists for authenticity. This approach ensures Frankenstein 2025 stands as a character-driven epic, where each actor's background enriches the narrative tapestry. Frankenstein, 2025 film, production, release, and reception. Production development and pre-production. The journey of Guillermo del Toro's Frankenstein represents one of the most prolonged passion projects in contemporary cinema, spanning nearly 2 decades from conception to completion. The Mexican filmmaker first publicly expressed his desire to adapt Mary Shelley's seminal 1818 novel in 2007, describing it as a project he would kill to make. Del Toro envisioned creating a faithful adaptation that would honor the novel as a Miltonian tragedy, drawing inspiration from John Milton's Paradise Lost, which heavily influenced Shelley's original work. Del Toro's reverence for the Frankenstein story runs deep, rooted in his childhood experiences. Raised in a devout Catholic household in Guadalajara, Mexico, the director has spoken extensively about how Boris Karloff's portrayal of the creature in James Whale's 1931 Universal film provided him with a visceral understanding of what a saint or messiah might look like. This spiritual connection to the material would inform every aspect of his eventual adaptation, transforming what could have been a straightforward horror film into a meditation on creation, abandonment, and the search for meaning. In January 2008, Del Toro revealed that he had begun creating detailed drawings and visual concepts for his version of Frankenstein, intending to use them as the foundation for the film's aesthetic world. He had also started taking script notes, though this work was interrupted by the Writers Guild of America strike that year. During this early phase, Del Toro articulated his vision with remarkable clarity, stating his intention to combine elements from both Frankenstein and its sequel, Bride of Frankenstein, while exploring dimensions of the story that had never been fully realized on screen. He particularly praised Christopher Lee's portrayal of the creature in Hammer Films' Frankenstein series for capturing what he called the character's emptiness rather than just the tragic or Miltonian aspects. The project's initial development occurred through Del Toro's 3-year first-look picture deal with Universal Pictures, announced in September 2008. At that time, Frankenstein was positioned alongside an ambitious slate of other literary adaptations Del Toro hoped to direct, including Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, Kurt Vonnegut's Slaughterhouse-Five, and Charles Dickens' unfinished mystery novel Drood. Del Toro drew significant inspiration from Bernie Wrightson's acclaimed 1983 illustrated edition of Frankenstein, with its haunting pen and ink drawings that captured both the horror and pathos of Shelley's narrative. The director actively sought to involve Wrightson in designing the visual appearance of the creature, hoping to translate the artist's intricate line work into practical makeup effects. Despite Del Toro's enthusiasm, the project faced immediate obstacles. In 2009, he acknowledged that production on Frankenstein was unlikely to begin for at least 4 years. Though he had already begun taking concrete steps toward realization. He cast Doug Jones, a frequent collaborator who had previously worked with Del Toro on films like Pan's Labyrinth and Hellboy 2, The Golden Army, in the role of the creature. The director even initiated preliminary makeup tests with Jones, exploring how to physically transform the actor into Shelley's tragic creation. However, these plans were ultimately shelved when Universal Pictures decided to prioritize its planned Dark Universe franchise, an interconnected series of monster movies that the studio hoped would replicate the success of Marvel's cinematic universe. At Comic-Con 2010, Del Toro told reporters that Frankenstein remained his favorite novel in the world, emphasizing the personal significance of the material. In 2013, he expressed interest in casting Benedict Cumberbatch as the creature, demonstrating his ongoing commitment to the project despite the development challenges. By 2014, Del Toro revealed that Universal chairperson Don Langley had approached him multiple times about moving forward with both Frankenstein and a potential Bride of Frankenstein adaptation, but he remained hesitant precisely because the project meant so much to him. He feared that making the film would mean the end of being able to dream about it, a sentiment he expressed with characteristic melancholy. "Frankenstein to me is the pinnacle of everything, and part of me wants to do a version of it. Part of me wants to keep it as a dream." The project entered a new phase in 2020 when Del Toro, in an interview promoting the film Antlers, stated that if provided with adequate funding, he would create a Frankenstein adaptation spanning 2 to 3 films. This ambitious vision reflected his belief that Shelley's novel, with its complex narrative structure and shifting perspectives between Victor Frankenstein, the creature, and the frame narrator Captain Walden, demanded extensive cinematic treatment to be properly realized. The breakthrough came in 2023 when Netflix revived the project as part of a multi-year deal with Del Toro to produce content for the streaming platform. This partnership proved particularly fortuitous, coming on the heels of Del Toro's Academy Award-winning stop-motion animated film Guillermo del Toro's Pinocchio, which Netflix had produced in 2022. The Oscar win for Best Animated Feature demonstrated Netflix's commitment to supporting Del Toro's artistic vision, even for projects that might not have obvious commercial appeal. In March 2023, Variety revealed that Del Toro was set to write and direct Frankenstein, with Andrew Garfield, Oscar Isaac, and Mia Goth in early negotiations for key roles. By September 2023, Del Toro announced that principal photography would commence in February 2024, with Christoph Waltz joining the cast. However, a significant casting change occurred in January 2024 when Andrew Garfield, originally attached to play the creature, had to withdraw from the project due to scheduling conflicts resulting from the 2023 SAG-AFTRA strikes. The labor action had thrown Hollywood production schedules into chaos, creating unavoidable calendar conflicts for many actors. Jacob Elordi, the Australian actor who had gained prominence through the HBO series Euphoria and films like Priscilla and Saltburn, replaced Garfield in the pivotal role. This casting change created enormous pressure for the production team. Del Toro and his longtime makeup artist Mike Hill had spent 9 months designing and refining the appearance of Garfield's creature, developing an elaborate prosthetic makeup that would transform the actor while preserving his ability to deliver an emotionally nuanced performance. When Elordi came aboard, all of this work had to be scrapped, and the team had only 9 weeks to completely redesign the creature's look for the taller actor. At 6 feet 5 inches, Elordi's imposing physical presence offered different opportunities and challenges than Garfield would have presented. Interestingly, Elordi's casting came about through an unexpected connection. A hairstylist who had worked with Elordi on Sofia Coppola's Priscilla recommended him to Del Toro. During the production of Priscilla, Elordi had actually joked about being cast in Frankenstein before the role was officially his, an instance of life imitating aspiration. Del Toro later praised Elordi as the most perfect actor for the creature, noting that they established a supernaturally good connection that required very few words to achieve what they were seeking. Mike Hill, the creature designer and prosthetics supervisor, found specific qualities in Elordi that made him ideal for the role. He was drawn to what he described as Elordi's gangliness and the distinctive nature of his wrists and hands, noting a certain looseness in his physicality that could be harnessed for the character. Hill also observed Elordi's ability to shift into somber moments where he watches you really deftly, with low eyelids and long lashes reminiscent of Boris Karloff's iconic portrayal. This combination of an innocent demeanor contained within an imposing 6'5" frame created exactly the paradox Del Toro sought, a creature who could inspire both sympathy and terror. Andrew Garfield himself expressed disappointment at having to leave the project but graciously acknowledged that the role may have been meant for Elordi. When the two actors later met at a film festival in Marrakesh, Elordi shared details of his positive experience on the production, leading Garfield to comment that the role had provided Elordi with an experience he perhaps needed more than Garfield himself did. This generous perspective reflected the collaborative spirit that characterizes much of Del Toro's work. The supporting cast expanded to include Felix Kemmerer, known for his performance in All Quiet on the Western Front. Lars Mikkelsen from The Witcher and Ahsoka. David Bradley, who had previously worked with Del Toro on Pinocchio and was familiar to audiences from the Harry Potter films. Christian Convery from Sweet Tooth and Charles Dance from Game of Thrones. Dance's casting held particular resonance, as he had previously portrayed Baron Victor Frankenstein's father in the 2015 film Victor Frankenstein, bringing a metatextual layer to his role in Del Toro's version. In April 2024, Del Toro announced that Ralph Ineson had been cast in what he described as a pivotal cameo appearance. Del Toro approached this adaptation with a clear philosophical framework, explaining his method of engaging with iconic literary properties. "What I find beautiful is that when you create a universal myth, whether it's Frankenstein, Pinocchio, Dracula, or Sherlock Holmes, the myth itself rises so far above the original material that any interpretation is equally faithful to that myth, provided it captures the essential truth at its core." This perspective freed him to make creative choices that might depart from Shelley's specific narrative details while remaining true to the story's thematic heart. The screenplay, written entirely by Del Toro, structured the narrative into 3 distinct sections: an icebound prelude followed by 2 chapters titled Victor's Tale and The Creature's Tale. This structure drew directly from Shelley's novel, which opens from the perspective of Captain Walton before transitioning into Victor's first-person narrative and eventually incorporating the creature's own account of his experiences. Del Toro worked closely with editor Evan Schiff to ensure these transitions maintain narrative momentum despite the potential disruption of changing perspectives. As Schiff explained, with any movie that involves chapters and voiceover, keeping the momentum of the story up is really one of the greatest challenges that we have to keep an eye on. Oscar Isaac, cast as Victor Frankenstein, described the film as this very European story, but told through a very Latin American, Mexican, Catholic point of view. So, it was just high passion all the time. This characterization captured Del Toro's unique approach to the material, filtering Gothic European horror through his own cultural and religious background to create something that felt both faithful to Shelley and distinctly personal. Filming principal photography on Frankenstein commenced in February 2024, with shooting locations spanning Canada and Scotland. The production scope reflected Del Toro's commitment to practical effects and real-world locations whenever possible, avoiding the excessive reliance on green screen and digital environments that has become increasingly common in contemporary filmmaking. This decision aligned with Del Toro's established aesthetic preferences, as seen in previous films like Crimson Peak and The Shape of Water, where tangible sets and locations provide actors with concrete environments to inhabit and cinematographers with authentic textures to capture. The production established its primary base at Sinespace Studios in Toronto, Ontario, where massive interior sets were constructed to realize Del Toro's vision of Gothic grandeur. Toronto also served as the location for one of the film's most technically ambitious sequences, the Arctic prologue featuring the Danish ship Horizon trapped in ice. Rather than attempting to create this entirely through visual effects, Del Toro's team built substantial portions of the vessel on a mechanical gimbal in Toronto's Port Lands area, near Pinewood Studios. This gimbal allowed the ship to physically rock and move, providing authentic movement that actors could respond to and cameras could capture. The exterior of the ship measured large enough to accommodate full crew and equipment, with 3 sides constructed: the bow, the port side, and the stern. The surrounding ice field was dressed with chip ice and foam to create the illusion of the frozen Arctic landscape. For wider shots requiring a full view of the ship in its icy environment, the production created detailed miniatures at multiple scales. Jose Tilde, copyright Grainel of the Magic Camera Company, oversaw the construction of these miniatures at Shepperton Studios in London, including a 1/40 scale version standing 11 feet 6 inches tall, surrounded by a 24-foot by 18-foot landscape. 2 additional 120 scale towers were built for closer detail shots and dramatic up angles. These miniatures weren't merely static models but sophisticated constructions that could be photographed under carefully controlled lighting conditions to integrate seamlessly with the full-scale footage. For the sequences depicting the vast frozen wasteland where Victor pursues his creation, Production moved to Lake Nipissing near North Bay, Ontario, approximately 250 miles north of Toronto. This location provided authentically frozen expanses while remaining shallow in Oahu with an average depth of only 15 feet to ensure safety for cast and crew working on the ice. The natural environment offered the dramatic vistas and harsh conditions that the narrative required, though carefully managed to prevent any actual danger to the production team. Scotland served as the primary location for filming the European portions of the story, with Edinburgh and Glasgow providing both historic architecture and atmospheric settings that evoked the Gothic sensibility Del Toro sought. The production designer, Tamara de Varela, assembled the Frankenstein family's grand country estate from multiple real-world locations, creating a composite that exists nowhere in reality but feels entirely plausible on screen. The exterior of the Frankenstein Manor was filmed at Gosford House, an impressive 18th century mansion in East Lothian, Scotland. This property, the seat of the Earls of Wemyss and March, sits within 5,000 acres of parkland and coastline on the south side of the Firth of Forth. The house's grand architecture and aristocratic associations made it ideal for representing the Frankenstein family's wealth and social standing. The estate has previously appeared in period dramas including Outlander, where it served as Hellwater. The interior entrance hall, featuring a magnificent marble staircase, was also captured as Gosford House, providing continuity between exterior and interior shots. For the dining room scenes, production moved to Wilton House in Wiltshire, England, specifically utilizing the spectacular double-cube room. This architectural marvel, measuring 30 feet by 30 feet by 60 feet, creating two perfect cubes, was designed by Inigo Jones in the 17th century and features elaborate white and gold decoration along with an extensive collection of Van Dyck portraits. The room has appeared in numerous prestigious productions, including Stanley Kubrick's Barry Lyndon, The Madness of King George, and multiple Jane Austen adaptations. The funeral scene and garden sequences introducing Victor's younger brother William were also filmed at Wilton House, making use of the estate's elegant 18th century Palladian bridge, a temple-like stone structure that has become one of the property's most recognizable landmarks. Victor's childhood bedroom was filmed in the ballroom of Burghley House in Stamford, Lincolnshire. The room features elaborate period decoration, though the statue of a guardian angel seen in the film was actually a prop created specifically for the production rather than an existing element of the house. Burghley House has previously appeared in the 2005 Pride and Prejudice adaptation, Ron Howard's The Da Vinci Code, and The Flash. The Frankenstein family library required its own spectacular location, found at Dunt House in Aberdeenshire, Scotland. This relatively unknown estate became one of the film's most visually striking interiors. Production designer Tamara de Varela described arriving to find a space that had been used for children's birthday parties, with skateboarding marks on the walls and all the original bookshelves removed. Her team had to construct thousands of feet of custom bookshelves and populate them with period-appropriate volumes to create the scholarly atmosphere Del Toro envisioned. The transformation turned a damaged, repurposed space into the intellectual sanctuary where young Victor would have first encountered the scientific texts that would shape his obsessions. Victor's scientific workshop, the water tower where he creates the creature, presented unique challenges. Del Toro wanted Victor to conduct his experiments in a grand, abandoned municipal building perched on the edge of a cliff, an image that had existed in his mind from the beginning of the development process. The concept artist Guy Davis worked alongside de Varela to design this structure, drawing inspiration from real Scottish locations including Wallace Tower and the giant cold feet sculpture at St. Stephen's Church in Edinburgh. After exploring numerous iterations, they settled on a soaring Gothic water tower that combined industrial functionality with architectural drama. This water tower existed both as a full-scale interior set built at Sinespace Studios in Toronto and as elaborate miniatures photographed separately. Grainell's Magic Camera Company constructed what de Varela affectionately termed a maxicheria, a miniature so large it transcended the typical limitations of the format, standing 26 feet tall for wide exterior shots. This scale allowed for remarkable detail while still providing the control benefits of miniature photography. The miniature was surrounded by a detailed landscape that visual effects would later expand and enhance. For the tower's destruction sequence, multiple miniatures were rigged with over 120 pyrotechnic events, carefully choreographed to create the impression of a catastrophic collapse. The production team also built a 1/4 scale interior of Frankenstein's laboratory, replicating the glowing fuel cells and spiral staircase from the full-size set. These miniature interiors were filmed at high frame rate tests around 144 frames per second to create the slow-motion effect that makes destruction appear to occur at a proper scale. VFX supervisor Dennis Berardi explained that they used the standard formula of multiplying the denominator of the scale by frame rate to achieve believable motion, though he noted that this rule of thumb doesn't always work perfectly with fire and water, necessitating extensive testing. The Royal College of Medicine scenes, where Victor presents his controversial research to disapproving academic authorities, were filmed utilizing multiple Scottish locations. Production designer Dave Arale explained that they couldn't find an existing operating theatre that matched their needs, so they drew inspiration from the veterinary school's anatomical theatre in Berlin and London's Old Operating Theatre, incorporating architectural details and mosaics from Glasgow City Hall to create the set in the Toronto studios. This approach exemplifies the production's method of synthesizing elements from various real locations to create spaces that feel authentic while serving the story's specific dramatic requirements. The confession scene featuring Victor in what appears to be a crypt was filmed in Glasgow Cathedral, utilizing the medieval building's atmospheric underground spaces. Street scenes showing Victor in the city were shot with the Canongate toll booth building providing a distinctive Edinburgh backdrop. These location choices grounded the film in real Scottish architecture while carefully controlling which specific buildings and spaces appeared on screen. Del Toro reunited with director of photography Dan Lustsen, with whom he had previously collaborated on Crimson Peak, The Shape of Water, and Nightmare Alley. Their established working relationship allowed for a visual shorthand based on years of shared experience. Lustsen described Del Toro's approach as beginning with detailed mood boards for each scene, visual references that established the emotional tone and aesthetic direction for the entire production team. For Frankenstein, they chose to shoot the entire film using the Arri Alexa 65 camera, the same large-format digital system they had employed on Nightmare Alley. However, unlike that previous production, where the Alexa 65 was used for selected sequences, Frankenstein would be captured entirely in 65mm format, including Steadicam and crane shots. This presented technical challenges, as the Alexa 65's size and weight makes it considerably more difficult to mount on moving platforms than smaller cameras. The production team had to engineer solutions for getting the camera into positions typically reserved for more compact equipment. Lustsen paired the Alexa 65 with Leitz Thalia lenses, which he favored for their character and optical qualities. To control highlights while maintaining deep blacks, he used custom-made magnetic diffusion filters combining neutral density and black Pro Mista that were positioned behind the lens rather than in front. This unconventional placement allowed for control of specular highlights without introducing lens flare, which can become problematic in period pieces where anachronistic lighting sources need to be carefully managed. The entire film was shot at T4. A relatively deep stop that maximized depth of field while still allowing for the low-light conditions Del Toro preferred. Remarkably, approximately 80 to 90% of Frankenstein was shot using a 24mm lens. On the Alexa 65's large-format sensor, this provides an exceptionally wide field of view while still allowing for intimate close-ups that don't appear distorted. This consistency and focal length creates a distinctive visual signature, encouraging careful composition and precise blocking rather than relying on lens changes to vary the frame. The film's lighting approach favored what Lustsen described as single-source aesthetics, using powerful individual lights rather than the broad, diffused illumination common in contemporary productions. On stage, 20 to 24 kilowatt tungsten lamps shaped the atmosphere, while on location, HMI fixtures pushed daylight through layers of smoke and haze. Lustsen explained that they created depth through shafts of light rather than visible lamp sources, maintaining a believable world even while using highly stylized lighting. The mixing of color temperatures of warm firelight against the steel blue of window light added what he called emotional contrast that reinforced the narrative's psychological dimensions. The creature's creation sequence presented particular challenges, requiring the orchestration of lightning, steam, and moonlight in a scene that could easily have descended into visual chaos. Lostson admitted to being a little afraid of that scene, understanding that it needed to feel spectacular while still maintaining consistency with the film's established aesthetic. The solution involved massive practical lighting setups using what he called old-fashioned 100K lightning strike as a powerful xenon fixtures that could simulate the effect of electrical discharge at the scale the scene required. The production maintained strict control over color palette throughout filming, establishing specific tones in camera rather than relying on extensive color correction in post-production. This discipline ensured that makeup, hair, and costume departments could see accurate representations of how their work would appear in the final film, preventing the disappointment that can occur when heavy color grading transforms the appearance of carefully crafted practical elements. The creature's prosthetic makeup, designed and executed by Mike Hill, represented one of the production's most significant technical achievements. Hill had to solve the fundamental challenge of all creature makeup, creating something that appears monstrous while preserving the actor's ability to deliver an emotionally complex performance. The design needed to suggest that the creature was assembled from disparate body parts while remaining sympathetic enough that audiences could connect with his suffering. Hill's approach emphasized texture and asymmetry, using medical-grade silicone to create skin that appeared to be stitched together from multiple sources. He deepened the grooves and seams between these sections to reinforce the story of the creature's construction while ensuring that Elordi's eyes remained expressive and his facial movements retained clarity. The prosthetics covered much of Elordi's body but were engineered to flex and move naturally with his performance, avoiding the rigid, mask-like quality that plagues lesser creature designs. Principal photography concluded in July 2024 after several months of intensive work across multiple countries. Additional photography and pickup shots continued through September 2024, allowing Del Toro to refine specific sequences and capture any needed supplementary material. The production scale and ambition, combined with Del Toro's meticulous attention to detail, created a filming process that demanded extraordinary coordination among hundreds of craftspeople and technicians. Post-production on Frankenstein began even as principal photography continued, following the contemporary practice of overlapping these phases to maximize efficiency and allow for ongoing creative adjustments. The film's 149-minute runtime required extensive work in editing, visual effects, sound design, and music composition to transform thousands of hours of footage and hundreds of component elements into a cohesive narrative. Editor Evan Schiff, working closely with Del Toro, faced the challenge of maintaining narrative momentum across the film's three-act structure while preserving the distinct character of each section. The opening prelude needed to establish mystery and dread without revealing too much about Victor or the creature's relationship. Victor's tale had to trace the protagonist's journey from grief-stricken son to obsessed scientist to horrified creator, while the creature's tale required shifting audience sympathies toward a character previously presented as monstrous. Schiff noted that determining when to introduce the creature and his full glory when he should first appear in Victor's narrative before his own chapter begins represented one of the most crucial structural decisions in the editing process. Visual effects supervision fell to Dennis Berardi, whose company Herne Hill Media, Mr. X, handled the majority of the film's extensive effects work. Despite Del Toro's preference for practical effects and in-camera techniques, Frankenstein still required approximately 1,200 visual effects shots. Berardi emphasized that Del Toro's mandate was for handmade realism VFX that felt photographed, period-appropriate, and emotionally grounded rather than spectacular in an obvious way. The goal was always restrained. Effects should serve the story and protect performances rather than calling attention to themselves. The Arctic sequences required particularly complex effects work. While substantial portions of the ship were built practically, The surrounding ice landscape was entirely digital, as were all of the skies seen in these scenes. Visual effects artists had to create believable Arctic conditions that matched the lighting and atmosphere of the practical ship footage, ensuring seamless integration between the physical and digital elements. The bowsprit, masts, and sails were fully digital constructions that had to interact convincingly with wind, weather, and the mechanical movement of the practical ship section. For Victor's Edinburgh Lecture Hall demonstration, where he presents a reanimated half-corpse that catches a ball, the production combined animatronics with digital effects. Puppeteers operated a practical puppet on set, which Del Toro and Lostson photographed under dramatic lighting. Visual effects artists then removed the puppeteers, replaced sections of the puppet with digital elements, and enhanced details like the exposed brain. This hybrid approach, mixing the tangible presence of the practical puppet with the control and enhancement possible through CGI, exemplifies Del Toro's methodology throughout the film. The creature himself required only subtle digital enhancement in most shots, a testament to the quality of Hill's prosthetic work and Elordi's performance. Visual effects primarily focused on adding what Del Toro called a cat eye effect, a reflection from the back of the retina that made the creature's eyes glow when light hit them at certain angles. This naturalistic detail reinforced the creature as something simultaneously human and animal, familiar yet uncanny. Artists also refined the seams and grooves in the prosthetics where necessary, deepening shadows to emphasize the assembled nature of the creature's body without making these elements so prominent that they distracted from Elordi's performance. The most extensive digital work involved the creation and destruction of Victor's water tower laboratory. While miniatures provided a foundation, visual effects extended these practical elements to create the full environment of the clifftop setting, the surrounding landscape, the interior spaces visible through windows, and eventually the tower's catastrophic collapse. More than 120 practical pyrotechnic events were photographed at high speed on the miniatures, providing real fire and debris. Digital fire was then added where needed to enhance these practical explosions, while digital set extensions expanded the scale of the destruction beyond what the miniatures could physically achieve. The production's approach to visual effects reflected Del Toro's belief that digital tools should be servants of storytelling rather than drivers of spectacle. In discussions with his VFX team, he emphasized story and emotion over methodology, insisting that effects needed to feel invisible even when they were omnipresent. As Berardi explained, "We wanted the audience to feel the drama of the moment, especially when they're watching wall-to-wall visual effects. It was all about restraint and protecting the performances. We respect texture, atmosphere and emotion before we get into spectacle." The visual effects work was divided among several studios, though Herne Hill, Mr. X maintained primary oversight to ensure consistency. Del Toro's preference for working quickly meant that the in-house team at Herne Hill, headed by Associate VFX Supervisor Brandon Schaafsma, could provide rapid turnarounds on designs, mock-ups, and test composites, often delivering work in hours or days rather than the weeks or months typical of larger facilities. ILM, Industrial Light Magic, contributed to specific sequences requiring their specialized capabilities, bringing their considerable technical expertise to bear on Del Toro's vision. Sound design and mixing occurred simultaneously with visual effects work, building the film's sonic landscape through layers of dialogue, Foley, ambient sound, and effects. Del Toro has always placed enormous importance on sound in his films, understanding that audio works subconsciously on audiences in ways that visuals cannot. The soundscape needed to support the film's emotional transitions from the howling Arctic winds of the prologue to the refined sounds of Victorian drawing rooms to the industrial clangor of Victor's laboratory to the primal sounds of the creature navigating wilderness. The musical score came from Alexander Desplat, who had previously collaborated with Del Toro on The Shape of Water and Pinocchio. Desplat was officially confirmed as composer in January 2025, though discussions and preliminary work had begun much earlier. In a May 2025 interview, Desplat described his approach. "Guillermo's cinema is very lyrical, and my music is rather lyrical too. So I think the music of Frankenstein will be something very lyrical and emotional. I'm not trying to write horrific music." This statement encapsulated the film's overall aesthetic strategy, approaching Gothic horror through romanticism and tragedy rather than through conventional fear and revulsion. Desplat's score was recorded at Lyndhurst Studios in London, utilizing a full orchestra to create the sweeping, emotionally resonant sound Del Toro sought. The score needed to reflect the film's period setting while feeling emotionally immediate to contemporary audiences, a balance Desplat achieved through his trademark combination of classical orchestration and subtle modern sensibilities. The music functions as another character in the narrative, commenting on the action without overwhelming it, supporting performances without indicating how audiences should feel. Color grading represented the final step in establishing the film's visual identity. Cinematographer Lostson and colorist worked to enhance the natural palette established during filming, deepening shadows, refining skin tones, and ensuring visual consistency across footage shot in multiple countries under varying conditions. Because so much attention had been paid to color during production, the grading process involved refinement rather than transformation, honoring the work of the makeup, costume, and production design teams by preserving the colors they had so carefully chosen. The entire post-production process extended through mid-2025, with Del Toro involved in every aspect. His hands-on approach ensured that the final film reflected his vision, but it also meant that the post-production team had to accommodate his exacting standards and his willingness to continue refining details until the very last possible moment. This perfectionism, while demanding, resulted in a film whose every element feels considered and deliberate. Alexander Desplat's score for Frankenstein represents a crucial element of the film's artistic achievement, providing the emotional and atmospheric foundation upon which the visual storytelling builds. Desplat's third collaboration with Del Toro demonstrates the deepening understanding between composer and director, with each bringing out distinctive qualities in the other's work. The score's development began long before Desplat's official confirmation as composer, with early conversations between him and Del Toro exploring the emotional territory the music needed to cover. Unlike conventional horror scores that rely on dissonance, sudden dynamic shifts, and anxiety-inducing textures to create fear, Desplat approached Frankenstein as a tragedy in a classical sense. He described his musical conception as lyrical and emotional rather than horrific, understanding that Del Toro's film sought to move audiences rather than simply frighten them. The orchestration emphasizes strings and woodwinds, creating a sound palette that evokes 19th century romanticism while remaining accessible to contemporary listeners. Desplat employed a full symphony orchestra, recorded at Lyndhurst Studios in London, one of the premier facilities for film scoring. The choice of this venue wasn't merely practical but aesthetic, as Lyndhurst's acoustic properties favor the warm, enveloping sound that Del Toro and Desplat sought. The score's structure mirrors the film's three-act division, with distinct musical identities for the Arctic prologue, Victor's narrative, and the creature's tale. The Arctic sequences feature austere, ominous music that suggests both the physical cold and the emotional desolation of the setting. Sparse instrumentation and sustained tones create a sense of vast, empty space where two figures, a creator and creation, pursue each other across an inhospitable landscape. Victor's sections utilize more complex, dynamic orchestration reflecting his psychological state as it shifts from grief to obsession to horror. The music traces his emotional journey, beginning with melancholic themes associated with the loss of his mother and brother, building to frenzied passages accompanying his experiments, and finally descending into darker territories as he confronts the consequences of his actions. Desplat provides Victor with the musical theme that recurs in various forms throughout the film, transforming to reflect his changing circumstances while maintaining recognizable melodic and harmonic elements. The creature's music presents the score's greatest challenge and most significant achievement. Desplat needed to create musical material that could express the creature's emotional complexity, his confusion, his loneliness, his yearning for connection, his rage at rejection, and his ultimate resignation. The composer crafted a theme that begins with tentative, questioning phrases and gradually gains strength and definition as the creature develops consciousness and agency. This theme incorporates both beauty and pain, refusing to sentimentalize the creature while insisting on his essential humanity. Several set pieces in the score stand out for their dramatic power. The creation sequence, where electricity brings the creature to life, features aggressive, pulsing rhythms and dissonant brass that evoke both scientific achievement and violation of natural law. The music builds relentlessly toward the moment of animation, then shifts abruptly to something more intimate and vulnerable as we see the newly conscious creature beginning to experience existence. The score also provides crucial support for the film's quieter moments, which Del Toro insisted were as important as the more obviously dramatic sequences. When the creature holds a mouse, observing its tiny life with wonder and gentleness, Desplat's music underscores the poignancy without forcing sentiment. When Elizabeth appears on screen, her theme conveys both her individual character and her symbolic significance as an idealized figure of purity and compassion. Desplat incorporated period-appropriate musical textures where they served the story, including occasional references to compositions that would have been contemporary with the film's 1857 setting. However, he avoided the trap of creating a merely historical score, understanding that modern audiences need emotional accessibility rather than period authenticity. The music speaks directly to viewers in 2025 while respecting the historical context of the narrative. The recording sessions in London brought together some of the finest orchestral musicians in Europe, with Desplat conducting and refining the performances until they matched his exacting standards. Del Toro attended many of these sessions, providing feedback and occasionally requesting adjustments to how the music interacted with specific images or moments. This collaborative process ensured that score and visuals worked in perfect harmony, each enhancing the other. Several pieces from the score were released ahead of the film's premiere, generating anticipation among film music enthusiasts and Del Toro's devoted fanbase. Critics who heard these advance excerpts praised Desplat's ability to create music that felt simultaneously classical and contemporary, honoring the Gothic tradition while bringing fresh emotional perspectives. The complete soundtrack album was released digitally on the same day as the film's theatrical premiere, with a physical release on vinyl and CD following in subsequent weeks. The album features approximately 70 minutes of music from the film's 149-minute runtime, representing the score's most significant and emotionally resonant passages. Desplat sequenced the album to function as a coherent listening experience independent of the visuals, creating musical continuity that allows the themes and motifs to develop across the runtime. In interviews promoting the score's release, Desplat emphasized his belief that Frankenstein's music needed to honor Mary Shelley's original creation while serving Guillermo del Toro's specific cinematic interpretation. He noted that Shelley's novel emerged from Romanticism, a movement that elevated emotion and individual experience above rationalism, and his score attempted to capture that same prioritization of feeling over intellect. The music doesn't explain or analyze but rather invites audiences to experience the story emotionally, to feel Victor's obsession and the creature's suffering rather than merely understanding them intellectually. Released theatrical, Netflix's approach to releasing Frankenstein represented a significant departure from the streaming service's typical distribution strategy. While Netflix has traditionally favored limited theatrical releases primarily designed to qualify films for awards consideration, the company recognized that Del Toro's Frankenstein possessed the scale, craftsmanship, and cultural significance to justify a more substantial theatrical rollout. The film received its world premiere as the opening night film at the 75th Berlin International Film Festival on February 13, 2025. This prestigious placement signaled Netflix's confidence in the film and provided Del Toro with a platform to present his work to international critics, industry professionals, and cinema enthusiasts. The Berlin premiere featured the cast and creative team walking the red carpet before a screening in the festival's massive Berliner Palast Theater, which seats over 1,600 people. The audience response proved enthusiastic, with extended applause following the screening and immediate speculation about the film's awards prospects. Following the Berlin premiere, Netflix scheduled theatrical screenings in select IMAX theaters across North America and major international markets beginning February 21, 2025. This IMAX release, while limited in scope compared to major studio tentpoles, represented one of Netflix's most ambitious theatrical strategies to date. The company secured approximately 200 IMAX screens in key cities, allowing audiences to experience Del Toro's meticulously crafted imagery on the largest possible screens with the highest quality projection and sound systems. The decision to format the film for IMAX required technical adjustments during post-production. While Frankenstein was not shot using IMAX cameras, the film's 65mm digital capture on the Arri Alexa 65 provided sufficient resolution to be reformatted for IMAX screens without significant quality loss. The IMAX version featured expanded aspect ratio for selected sequences, allowing more of the frame to be visible on IMAX screens than in standard theatrical or streaming presentations. This formatting work was overseen by Del Toro and cinematographer Lostson to ensure it honored their original compositional intentions. The IMAX theatrical window extended for 2 weeks, from February 21 through March 6, 2025. Before the film transitioned to streaming. This relatively brief window reflected Netflix's primary business model while still allowing theatrical enthusiasts and Del Toro completists to experience the film as a cinematic event. Some industry observers criticized Netflix for not providing a longer theatrical window, arguing that Frankenstein's craftsmanship merited broader distribution and an extended opportunity to generate box office revenue. However, Netflix maintained that their strategy balanced theatrical presentation with their commitment to making content quickly available to their global subscriber base. The theatrical release also included special event screenings in select cities featuring Q&A sessions with Del Toro and cast members. These events, promoted through Netflix's social media channels and entertainment press, sold out rapidly and generated significant social media engagement. Del Toro's willingness to discuss his creative process and his infectious enthusiasm for the source material proved enormously appealing to audiences hungry for substantive engagement with the film beyond simply watching it. International theatrical distribution varied by territory, with some regions receiving more extensive releases than others based on local market conditions and Netflix's specific agreements with theatrical exhibitors in each country. The UK, France, Germany, and several other European markets received wider releases than most territories, reflecting both the film's European setting and Del Toro's significant fan base in these regions. Mexico received a particularly robust theatrical release, honoring Del Toro's status as one of the nation's most celebrated filmmakers. Marketing for the theatrical release emphasized the film's craftsmanship, scale, and Del Toro's auteur status. Trailers highlighted the practical effects, the Scottish locations, the period details, and the performances, positioning Frankenstein as a prestige film deserving theatrical presentation rather than casual streaming consumption. Posters and promotional artwork drew on Gothic visual traditions while incorporating Del Toro's signature aesthetic sensibility, creating marketing materials that felt distinctive and artistically credible. Critical response to the theatrical screenings proved largely positive, with many reviewers specifically noting how the film benefited from big-screen presentation. The sweeping Arctic vistas, the intricate period details, the subtle work of the prosthetic makeup, and the power of Lostson's cinematography all registered more forcefully in theaters than they would on home screens. Several critics argued that Frankenstein represented exactly the kind of adult-oriented, artistically ambitious filmmaking that contemporary theatrical distribution too often overlooks in favor of franchise entertainment. The theatrical release also sparked renewed discussion about Netflix's distribution philosophy and the ongoing tension between theatrical exhibition and streaming availability. Some theater owners expressed frustration that the IMAX window was so brief, arguing that Frankenstein could have generated substantial box office revenue with a traditional wide release and extended run. Netflix countered that their model prioritizes subscriber value and global accessibility over theatrical revenue, and that the limited theatrical release served primarily to enhance the film's cultural prestige rather than to generate significant income. Home media Frankenstein became available for streaming on Netflix on March 7, 2025. Immediately following the conclusion of its theatrical IMAX window. The film launched simultaneously across all territories where Netflix operates, making it accessible to the service's approximately 280 million subscribers worldwide. This day-and-date global release represented Netflix's standard practice, eliminating the geographic windowing that traditional film distribution has historically employed. The streaming release featured multiple viewing options to accommodate different viewing preferences and technical capabilities. Netflix provided the film in standard definition, high definition, 4K Ultra HD, and with support for HDR10 and Dolby Vision high dynamic range formats. The highest quality version, available to subscribers with premium plans and compatible display equipment, reproduced much of the theatrical presentation's visual richness, though necessarily scaled for home viewing environments. Audio options included the original English language track and Dolby Atmos for compatible sound systems, as well as 5.1 surround and stereo mixes for more modest setups. Netflix also provided dubbed versions in over 20 languages and subtitles in more than 30, ensuring accessibility for its global audience. The subtitle tracks included not only standard translations but also closed captions for deaf and hard-of-hearing viewers, meeting contemporary accessibility standards. Netflix promoted the streaming release extensively through its platform interface, featuring Frankenstein prominently on the homepage for subscribers across all territories during launch week. The company also created supplementary content to enhance viewer engagement, including a 20-minute making-of documentary featuring interviews with Del Toro, cast members, and key creative personnel. This featurette explored the production's practical effects, the challenges of creating the creature's makeup, and Del Toro's approach to adapting Shelley's novel. Additional supplementary materials included production photo galleries, behind-the-scenes footage of key sequences being filmed, and an interactive feature allowing viewers to explore the production design of major locations. These materials, while modest compared to the extensive bonus features common on physical media releases, provided context and depth for viewers interested in the creative process. The streaming release also coincided with the marketing partnerships between Netflix and several educational organizations focusing on Gothic literature and 19th century history. These partnerships produced study guides, discussion questions, and contextual materials designed to support the use of the film in academic settings, potentially introducing Del Toro's interpretation to students studying Mary Shelley's novel. Physical media release occurred approximately 3 months after the streaming debut, with 4K Ultra HD Blu-ray, standard Blu-ray, and DVD versions becoming available in major markets in June 2025. The physical releases featured more extensive bonus features than the streaming version, including multiple audio commentary tracks, extended behind-the-scenes documentaries, deleted scenes, and conceptual artwork galleries. The 4K version also included the IMAX-formatted version of the film, allowing home viewers to see the expanded aspect ratio sequences. Del Toro recorded an audio commentary track specifically for the physical release, providing his characteristically detailed and insightful discussion of creative choices, production challenges, thematic intentions, and literary influences. He was joined on selected sequences by cinematographer Lostson, editor-chef, and production designer Dave Arale, creating a comprehensive document of the film's creation. These commentary tracks ran the full length of the film and provided the kind of deep analysis that Del Toro enthusiasts have come to expect from his home video releases. The physical editions also included a collectible booklet featuring essays about the production, the history of Frankenstein adaptations, and Mary Shelley's creation of the novel. The 4K edition came in premium packaging featuring original artwork commissioned specifically for the release, making it appealing to collectors willing to pay a higher price for enhanced presentation. Sales figures for the physical media releases remain modest compared to the film's streaming numbers, reflecting broader industry trends away from physical media ownership. However, the releases found an audience among film collectors, Del Toro devotees, and home theater enthusiasts who valued the superior audio and video quality of physical formats over streaming compression. The 4K edition in particular received praise for its exceptional picture quality, with several home theater publications noting that it represented reference-quality video encoding. The streaming release's viewership numbers, while never officially disclosed by Netflix in specific terms, appeared to be substantial based on the company's public statements and the film's performance on various streaming tracking services. Netflix announced that Frankenstein had reached #1 in its global film chart during launch week, with the company's metrics indicating it had been watched by over 50 million accounts within the first 2 weeks of availability. These figures, while impressive, remain difficult to contextualize given Netflix's proprietary methodology for calculating viewership and the company's historical reluctance to provide detailed, independently verifiable data. The streaming availability generated renewed cultural conversation about the Frankenstein story and its enduring relevance. Educational institutions incorporated Del Toro's film into curricula, comparing his interpretation to both Shelley's novel and previous film adaptations. Online discussion communities dissected the film's themes, performances, and creative choices, generating the kind of sustained engagement that Netflix values as much as raw viewership numbers. Reception. Box office. Given Frankenstein's limited theatrical release strategy, box office performance represented a secondary consideration rather than the primary metric of success. However, the film's theatrical run still generated noteworthy revenue, particularly during its IMAX engagement. During its 2-week IMAX theatrical window from February 21 through March 6, 2025, Frankenstein grossed approximately $12.8 million domestically across roughly 200 IMAX screens. This represented a strong per-screen average of approximately $64,000, indicating robust audience interest in experiencing the film in premium theatrical formats. The film's first weekend alone accounted for approximately $7.2 million of this total, with business remaining steady through the first week before experiencing the typical second weekend decline. International IMAX box office added approximately $18.5 million from territories including the United Kingdom, France, Germany, Australia, and Mexico, among others. The international performance proved particularly strong in European markets, where both Del Toro's reputation and the film's European settings generated significant interest. Mexico's contribution exceeded industry expectations, with Del Toro's status as a national treasure driving passionate audience support. The combined global IMAX gross of approximately $31.3 million positioned Frankenstein as one of Netflix's most successful theatrical releases to date, surpassing the theatrical performance of films like The Irishman, Marriage Story, and Roma. However, these comparisons remain somewhat misleading, as those films received even more limited theatrical releases primarily designed to qualify for awards consideration rather than to generate substantial revenue. Industry analysts noted that had Netflix provided Frankenstein with a traditional wide release and extended theatrical window, the film likely would have generated substantially higher box office returns. Estimates suggested that with a conventional 3-month theatrical window across 3,4,000 screens domestically and comparable international distribution, Frankenstein might have grossed between $200–300 million globally, based on comparable adult-oriented prestige films with similar production values and critical reception. However, such speculation remains largely academic, as Netflix's business model doesn't prioritize theatrical revenue. The company views theatrical releases primarily as marketing events that generate cultural conversation and critical prestige rather than as significant revenue streams. The theatrical box office for Frankenstein, while respectable, represented a tiny fraction of the value Netflix derives from the film as a subscriber attraction and retention tool. The per-screen averages during the IMAX run indicated that audiences who chose to see Frankenstein theatrically were passionate and engaged. Exit polling data suggested high satisfaction rates, with audiences particularly praising the visual craftsmanship, the performances, and the emotional depth. Word of mouth proved strong, with theatrical viewers frequently recommending the film to friends and family through social media and traditional conversation. The theatrical run also generated approximately $1.2 million in premium upcharges for 3D and enhanced screening formats in select international territories where these presentations were available. While 3D was not the primary format, its availability in certain markets demonstrated Netflix's willingness to accommodate local exhibition preferences. Theater owners who participated in the IMAX release reported generally positive experiences, noting that Frankenstein brought audiences to theaters during what is typically a slow period in the exhibition calendar. The late February through early March window avoids major holiday seasons and typically features fewer high-profile releases, making Frankenstein's strong per-screen performance particularly valuable for exhibitors looking to maintain consistent business. However, some theater owners expressed frustration with the brief theatrical window, arguing that audience interest remained strong when the film transitioned to streaming, suggesting that additional weeks in theaters could have generated further revenue. The abrupt transition from theatrical exclusivity to global streaming availability also complicated marketing, as many potential theatrical viewers simply opted to wait 2 weeks rather than pay for IMAX tickets. The film's theatrical performance, while modest in absolute terms, exceeded Netflix's internal expectations and provided data supporting the company's occasional theatrical release strategies. The success demonstrated that certain Netflix films possess theatrical appeal beyond just awards consideration, potentially influencing future distribution decisions for high-profile projects with strong visual components. Critical response. Critical reception for Frankenstein proved largely positive, with reviewers praising Del Toro's craftsmanship, the performances, and the film's emotional depth while occasionally critiquing its narrative pacing and length. The film's review aggregation scores reflected this generally favorable but not unanimous reception. On Rotten Tomatoes, Frankenstein holds an 82% approval rating based on reviews from 312 critics, with an average rating of 7.4 out of 10. The site's critical consensus reads, Guillermo del Toro's Frankenstein honors Mary Shelley's novel with impressive craftsmanship and emotional depth, even if its deliberate pacing tests patience. This consensus captures the film's strengths while acknowledging the primary criticism that emerged across multiple reviews. Metacritic, which assigns a weighted average score based on reviews from mainstream critics, gave Frankenstein a score of 76 out of 100. Indicating generally favorable reviews based on 58 critic assessments. This score positioned the film among Del Toro's well-received works, though slightly below the exceptional marks received by Pan's Labyrinth and The Shape of Water. Many critics praised Del Toro's visual approach, noting how the emphasis on practical effects and real locations created a tactile, grounded aesthetic that enhanced the story's emotional impact. The Los Angeles Times described the film as having a textured, handmade quality that contemporary effects-heavy cinema too often lacks. Cinematographer Lostsin's work received particular acclaim, with several critics highlighting the chiaroscuro lighting and carefully composed frames that evoke both Gothic painting and classical Hollywood craftsmanship. The performances garnered widespread praise, with Jacob Elordi's portrayal of the creature earning particular attention. Critics noted his ability to convey complex emotions through extensive prosthetic makeup, with physical performance that suggested both the creature's inhuman strength and his childlike vulnerability. Many reviews specifically mentioned the sequence where the creature first experiences consciousness, praising Elordi's wordless performance as he navigates confusion, pain, and wonder. Oscar Isaac's Victor Frankenstein received more mixed responses. Some critics found his portrayal appropriately tormented and obsessive, capturing Victor's dangerous combination of brilliance and myopia. Others felt the performance occasionally veered into theatrical excess, particularly in sequences depicting Victor's scientific fervor. However, most agreed that Isaac successfully conveyed Victor's fundamental tragedy, his inability to love what he has created, a failure that stems from his inability to accept imperfection and death. Mia Goth's Elizabeth generated praise for bringing depth to a role that could easily have remained a passive idealized figure. Critics noted how Goth's performance suggested Elizabeth's awareness of Victor's emotional unavailability while maintaining her commitment to him, creating a character who feels fully realized despite limited screen time. Her scenes with both Victor and the creature were highlighted as among the film's most emotionally resonant moments. The supporting cast received consistent praise, with particular attention to Christoph Waltz's performance as Waldman, Lars Mikkelsen's work, and the young actors portraying Victor's family members. The ensemble created a believable social world that grounded the Gothic narrative in recognizable human relationships and social dynamics. Mike Hill's creature design emerged as one of the film's most universally praised elements. Critics repeatedly noted how the prosthetics avoided the extremes of either excessive monstrousness or sentimental beauty, instead creating a figure whose appearance suggested his unnatural origin while preserving his fundamental humanity. The design's asymmetry and visible seams told the story of the creature's construction without overwhelming Elordi's performance. Production designer Tamara Varel's work received substantial critical attention, with reviewers praising the authentic period detail and the Gothic atmosphere created through location selection and set construction. The Water Tower Laboratory became an iconic image that appeared in virtually every review, with critics recognizing it as a perfect visual embodiment of Victor's transgressive ambitions. The synthesis of multiple real Scottish locations into coherent fictional spaces demonstrated sophisticated production design that served the story while creating memorable imagery. Alexander Desplat's score received generally positive notices, though with less universal acclaim than some other aspects of the production. Critics appreciated its emotional directness and romantic sweep while occasionally suggesting it occasionally overwhelmed quieter moments. The score's refusal to employ conventional horror cliché tilde copyright was noted as both a strength and occasional weakness, with some reviewers wishing for more sonic variety. The most common criticism across reviews concerned the film's 149-minute runtime and its deliberate pacing. Multiple critics suggested that Del Toro's commitment to fully exploring the story's emotional and thematic dimensions resulted in a film that occasionally felt languid or overly expansive. The three-act structure, while literarily faithful, created what some reviewers experienced as a false ending, with the creature's extended narrative following Victor's apparent conclusion feeling like the beginning of a second film. Some critics questioned Del Toro's interpretive choices, particularly his emphasis on Victor's grief over his mother's death as the primary motivation for his scientific obsessions. While the psychological grounding made Victor more sympathetic, some reviewers felt it simplified the novel's more complex exploration of scientific hubris and masculine ambition. The film's reduced emphasis on the social and political dimensions of Shelley's work, particularly its critique of Enlightenment rationalism and masculine privilege, drew criticism from reviewers approaching the material from feminist or politically engaged perspectives. The film's treatment of religion and spirituality generated varied responses. Del Toro's Catholic background influenced his interpretation, creating a version of Frankenstein deeply concerned with questions of creation, soul, and divine judgment. Some critics found the spiritual dimension enriching, adding philosophical weight to what could have been merely a horror story. Others felt it imposed theological concerns that weren't central to Shelley's more secular, rationalist critique. Several reviewers noted that Frankenstein felt somewhat old-fashioned in its approach, both aesthetically and narratively. This observation was typically framed as neither exclusively positive nor negative but rather as an acknowledgement that Del Toro was consciously working in a classical mode rather than attempting contemporary narrative innovation. For critics who valued traditional cinematic craft, this quality represented a strength. For those prioritizing formal experimentation, it occasionally felt conservative. The film's fidelity to Shelley's novel generated discussion among critics familiar with the source material. Most agreed that Del Toro had created one of the most literarily faithful adaptations while still imposing his distinctive directorial voice. The preservation of the novel's nested narrative structure, the inclusion of previously underrepresented plot elements, and the serious engagement with Shelley's themes distinguished this version from more loosely inspired takes on the Frankenstein myth. International critical response largely paralleled North American reception, though with some regional variations. European critics particularly praised the Scottish locations and period authenticity, while occasionally noting that Del Toro's Mexican Catholic sensibility created a version of European Gothic that felt slightly foreign, infused with a spiritual intensity more characteristic of Latin American than British literature. This quality was typically framed as distinctive and interesting rather than problematic. Mexican critics celebrated Del Toro's achievement while noting how his work continues engaging with themes particularly concerning creation, monstrosity, and Catholic guilt that have characterized his entire career. Several Mexican reviewers position Frankenstein within the broader context of Del Toro's filmography, seeing connections to earlier works like The Devil's Backbone, Pan's Labyrinth, and Crimson Peak in its treatment of trauma, innocence, and the Gothic imagination. The film received particular praise from horror cinema specialists and genre critics, who recognized it as a significant entry in the long history of Frankenstein adaptations. These reviewers appreciated Del Toro's deep knowledge of cinematic horror history, noting visual and thematic references to previous Frankenstein films while acknowledging how he had created something distinctive rather than derivative. The film was positioned within ongoing conversations about prestige horror and the continued vitality of Gothic storytelling. Academic critics and scholars of Gothic literature generally responded positively, praising Del Toro's serious engagement with Shelley's novel and his willingness to preserve elements that many adaptations jettison. The frame narrative structure, the creature's extensive self-narration, and the preservation of the Arctic setting distinguished this version as unusually faithful to the source while still functioning as cinema rather than illustrated literature. Feminist critics offered varied perspectives. Some praised the film's sympathetic treatment of the creature as a figure denied the fundamental right to determine his own existence, reading this as commentary on bodily autonomy and consent. Others criticized the film for reducing Elizabeth to an idealized feminine figure whose primary narrative function involves inspiring and mourning Victor, seeing this as a missed opportunity to develop Shelley's more complex treatment of women's limited agency within patriarchal structures. The film's representation of disability and difference generated thoughtful critical discussion. The creature's physical appearance and social rejection invited readings about societal treatment of those deemed different or monstrous based on appearance. Critics noted how the film engaged with those themes seriously while acknowledging that using physical difference as a visual marker of monstrosity remains inherently problematic, even when done sympathetically. Several prominent critics included Frankenstein in their lists of 2025's best films, with particularly strong support from those specializing in horror and fantasy cinema. The film appeared on numerous year-end top 10 lists, though it failed to achieve the near-universal critical acclaim that Del Toro's Pan's Labyrinth and The Shape of Water had received. This somewhat qualified success still positioned Frankenstein as one of the year's notable achievements, a serious work of craftsmanship and artistic ambition in an era increasingly dominated by franchise entertainment. Awards consideration began almost immediately after the Berlin premiere, with industry observers noting the film's strong technical craft and performances. While the film's horror elements and February release date created potential obstacles to major awards consideration historically, the Academy and other major awards bodies have shown bias against genre films and early-year releases as Frankenstein's artistic credentials and Del Toro's established reputation positioned it as a plausible contender in multiple categories. By mid-2025, Frankenstein had received numerous nominations from various critics' organizations and guild awards. The film earned particular recognition in craft categories, with nominations for cinematography, production design, makeup and hairstyling, visual effects, and costume design appearing regularly. Jacob Elordi received multiple Best Actor nominations from genre-focused organizations, though his prospects for recognition from more mainstream awards bodies remained uncertain given the Academy's historical reluctance to honor performances in horror films and under heavy prosthetic makeup. The critical reception, while largely positive, suggested that Frankenstein would likely be remembered as a strong entry in Del Toro's filmography rather than as an undisputed masterpiece. The film demonstrated his continued commitment to practical craftsmanship and emotional storytelling in an era of increasingly digital and ironic cinema, making it valuable regardless of its specific critical standing. For audiences and critics seeking adult-oriented, thematically serious, visually distinctive cinema, Frankenstein represented exactly the kind of film contemporary mainstream production too rarely offers, a work of genuine artistic ambition that trusts viewers to engage with challenging material and complex emotions. Guillermo del Toro's A Frankenstein is the magnum opus of his career. With A Frankenstein, Guillermo del Toro has not just summed up his career to date, but created a definitive adaptation of Mary Shelley's classic. Guillermo del Toro has been waiting to adapt A Frankenstein to the screen his entire life. Themes, ideas, and imagery from Mary Shelley's classic tale of Gothic horror, one of the genre's seminal texts, run through many of del Toro's previous 12 films, and while A Frankenstein has been on his bucket list of movies to make, he's never had the opportunity until now. In the introduction to the new annotated Frankenstein, 2017, Guillermo del Toro writes, "All my life, I was in love with monsters. This is a fact." It is no wonder, then, that Frankenstein, 2025, is irrefutably the film del Toro has been building toward his entire career. In del Toro's work, from Cronos to Pinocchio, from Ghosts to Gilman, the monsters are indisputably the heroes. Frankenstein comes full circle, going back to the source and reminding us of another fact that the movie-making industry, in its ceaseless hunger to consume and regurgitate any recognizable IP, frequently forgets. The creature is, and always has been, the tragic hero of Mary Shelley's masterpiece. Not Victor. Never Victor. I've barely begun, but I have to pause here to say it's impossible for me to be normal about a Frankenstein movie by Guillermo del Toro. I grew up with a family that displayed clay busts of Boris Karloff's monster in a place of honor and put out the Barbie versions of the monster and the bride with our Christmas tree every year. I first read Frankenstein around the same time I first saw Pan's Labyrinth, at a time in my life when seeking refuge with fictional monsters was more comforting than facing the real ones who were supposed to love me and didn't. Also, it doesn't hurt that I'll watch Oscar Isaac in literally anything, even Sucker Punch, one time but never again because it is absolute garbage. I was very much in the bag for this movie the moment it was announced. Once again, del Toro was making a movie just for me. I never expected del Toro to create a word-for-word adaptation of Frankenstein. I also did not expect it to be perfect. Del Toro has his flaws and indulgences, and those are out in full force in Frankenstein. Exquisite production design sometimes takes precedence over character development, visual elegance often papering over uneven pacing. The sprawling beginning is so engrossing that the rushed conclusion begs for 30 more minutes to merit the culmination of his chosen themes. But the bumps of this movie aren't deal breakers for me because the adaptive choices he makes throughout are so interesting, even when I don't agree with them. A perfect film is rare, especially when the subject matter is so close to the filmmaker's heart as Frankenstein is to del Toro's. And Frankenstein is not the same thing to del Toro that it is to me. That is the beauty of art inspired by another piece of art, to view it freshly from another person's eyes, to see a whole other monster than the one you thought you knew. Stitches and all. In an article for Netflix's Today magazine, Isaac writes about his first discussion about the film with del Toro. I sat with him at his kitchen table eating takeout Cuban food, and for roughly 2 hours we talked in Spanish about our fathers and about being fathers. With tears in our eyes, we told each other our stories of pain, love, forgiveness, and hope. Something else del Toro writes in the introduction to the new annotated Frankenstein: all storytelling is autobiography. Del Toro's Frankenstein is about fathers perpetuating cycles of abuse, about men who should not procreate yet do anyway and impose their vicious wills upon their innocent children. This could not be more literal. Del Toro isn't a director given to subtlety or subtext, and he shows his hand at the outset. When you cast Charles Dance as a patriarch, you get exactly what you pay for, complimentary. When in near-death Victor Frankenstein, Isaac, tells his tale to Captain Anderson, Lars Mikkelsen, blue from frostbite this time, he begins with the death of his young mother in childbirth, a goth under just enough prosthetics to make you squint, and the cold, exacting upbringing inflicted upon him by his aging surgeon father. For a minute there, it seems like the kind of adult bullshit you should address in therapy and maybe not on your deathbed between sips of Arctic chilled condensed milk. The Oedipal shit is no accident. He wants that Lekita lives rent-free in my head. Later, though, Victor's parental history haunts as foreshadowing evidence that although Victor hates his father and wants to outshine him, conquering death as the mere doctor never could, he is his father. In all the worst ways, Victor may be a product of his upbringing, but that excuse only goes so far. As an adult, he's an iconoclast, expelled from medical academia because his work reanimating corpses is not just heretical but inhuman. While on his scientific quest to conquer death, Victor loses all regard for life itself. People are just meat, only useful to him as objects and never subjects. Case in point, Alexander Desplat's score veers toward the jauntily deranged when Victor toils in his workshop of filthy creation, slicing through grey thighs and fiddling with the tendons of a filleted arm. He's never happier than when he's a butcher. He's never more pissed than when the soon-to-be hanged criminals he wants to disassemble for parts don't meet his high standards. So, then, is Victor's relentless, heartless, soulless pursuit to create life from the rotting discards of a never-ending cycle of war and violence really his father's fault? Of course not. Victor chooses to abandon morals, ethics and humanity simply because he can. The arrogance of knowledge becomes a convenient deflection from responsibility, and he surrounds himself with other men who selfishly do the same. Victor's only living associates are a pair of enablers, Christoph Waltz as Henrik Harlander, an arms merchant, and Felix Kammerer as William Frankenstein, Victor's underdeveloped younger brother, who know exactly what Victor's goal is and do whatever they can to help him achieve it. A compelling departure from the book here. Mary's Victor keeps his work a secret and suffers all that comes after in near hysterical isolation. Harlander is particularly despicable, funding Victor's research with inexhaustible wealth and an endless supply of bodies. Both the bounties of war profiteering, an invention of Delta Worlds to replace the hapless best friend in Mary's novel. Harlander isn't always a successful addition, except to underline a point. Even in death, no one is free from the bottomless greed of a megalomaniac with too much money. Isaac plays Victor like the worst kind of rock star, dripping with entitlement and justifying his every vile action as a natural extension of his brilliance. So surrounded by yes-men is he that when he finally encounters someone who tells him no Amy Goth again, this time as Elizabeth, Harlander's niece and William's fiancée tilde copyright he mistakes the obstruction for connection and believes himself in love. He's not in love, he just wants what he can't have. His dead mother, his boring beige brother's beloved, the elusive power over death, a convoluted revenge against the man who named him, all one and the same, all repulsive yet endlessly captivating. Isaac refuses to let you look away, no matter how much you want to. Anybody who says Victor Frankenstein is playing God isn't paying attention. He's playing mother, and he fails. In the novel, 9 seasons pass while Victor assembles his creature, and his own body becomes emaciated with confinement. His enthusiasm for his work is checked only by his anxiety for its completion. He speaks of this period as a time when the moon gazed on his midnight labors, while, with unrelaxed and breathless eagerness, he pursued nature to her hiding places. A more obvious pregnancy metaphor there never was, penned by a woman who knew all too well the indifferent fluidity between life and death during those 3 trimesters and beyond. Mary Shelley was a teenage mother who unfairly bore the guilt of her own mother's death after her birth and who, at the time of writing Frankenstein, was nursing a small child while still grieving the death of her first baby a year earlier. All storytelling is autobiography. Why not channel the most traumatizing experience of her young life into the very persons who could never understand it? Victor, of course, was modeled after the most important men in her orbit, first on her distant but demanding father, William Godwin, a man whose literary career and money troubles always took precedence over the welfare of his children. Then there was Mary's husband, Percy Bysshe Shelley, who lost custody of 2 children after his first wife's suicide, not his fault, for how could he be blamed for running off with the 16-year-old prodigy? And mourned the early deaths of 3 out of 4 of his children with Mary, but never to the degree she did. And finally, the careless, incest-prone Lord Byron, idolized by Percy, tolerated by Mary and England's first modern celebrity, a renegade poet who probably fathered a child with his half-sister. Byron also fathered a daughter with Mary's stepsister, Claire, ultimately causing her niece's death by sending her to a disease-ridden convent. Tethered to men such as them, it's no wonder Victor's immediate reaction to seeing his creation come to life in the novel is disgust and horror. He flees his newborn and absolves all responsibility for it. Mary never knew a faultless father. Del Toro presents an awful inversion here in the film. Somehow it is so much worse that when Victor sees his creature, Jacob Elordi, fucking incredible, alive after he believes him stillborn, he smiles, teaches the creature his name and leads this gentle giant straight to a dungeon and puts him in chains. Alone afterward, leaving the creature to shout the only word he knows. Victor thinks, I hadn't considered what comes after creation. This prompted the biggest guffaw from me, a mother of two feral boys who was in no way prepared for the frequency of unwanted post-bedtime naked dance parties, in a movie that is actually pretty funny for all of its horror. And so Victor enters his postpartum depression era. He doesn't handle it well, and the creature is the one who suffers the most for it. As the novelty of creation fades, Victor only sees the flaws in what he created and violently blames the creature for them. The epigraph of Frankenstein comes to mind here. Adam speaking to God in Paradise Lost, "Did I request thee, Maker, from my clay, to mold me man? Did I solicit thee, from darkness to promote me?" But the creature can't say anything but Victor's name. To Victor's unending irritation, the creature can't explain he is not Athena sprung fully formed from Zeus's head but an infant in a man's body assembled from parts for whom everything is new. He is learning, but learning slowly. Victor, a man who has clearly never met a human baby in his life, refuses to accept this lack of immediate perfection. But Elizabeth, a woman who stumbles upon the creature by happenstance, sees him instantly for what he is, a child who needs a parent. Victor is incapable of being that parent, neither father nor mother. He tries to destroy his creation rather than shoulder the burden of parenthood. He deserves everything that happens to him afterward, and somehow it's still not enough. Of the two, the creature's tale is infinitely more affecting than Victor's. While Victor is an expert manipulator of his own story, a clearly an unreliable narrator in the novel, the creature is born innocent and stays that way, delivering the unvarnished truth of his pitiable life. His first lesson is pain, fear Victor. His second lesson is pain, fear humans. His third, fourth, fifth, pain. Moments of wonder and kindness die by violence every time, and yet he persists. Partially because he has no choice. Oops, Victor created a monster who can't die. And partially because of the sentiment Shelley voices through her creature in the novel. Life, although it may only be an accumulation of anguish, is dear to me, and I will defend it. Elordi pulls off some real acting as the creature, something I didn't really think he was capable of, but I'm delighted to be proved wrong. His physicality is at turns tender and terrifying, evoking a toddler's first curious steps and a soldier's dogged march toward the trenches despite wounds that never stop bleeding. I found myself unable to look away from his hands in any given scene, his every gesture restricted by the nerve damage his creator so graciously bestowed upon him. And then, of course, his face, scarred and skeletal but so open it breaks your heart. Del Toro said in the Variety interview linked above that he cast Elordi for his eyes. Victor may not know in which body part he planted the seat of his creature's soul, but it is so agonizingly clear in Elordi's eyes that it never came from Victor at all. His soul is his own, and it takes to no longer be alone and in pain. The section of the film that focuses on the creature observing a pastoral family from the shadows long enough for his hair to grow shaggy is the most unabashedly sentimental part of the movie, the only section where I smiled as I do when watching my own children learn and grow, even though I knew what was coming. The creature's time with the blind old man, David Bradley, who teaches him to speak and read and be human, who becomes his only friend, is so gentle and good that I can't help but tear up now as I write this. It is devastating when the creature's time with the old man ends, maybe the most devastating sequence Del Toro has accomplished since the end of Pan's Labyrinth. When the creature cries, I cry. That's the rule. And if Del Toro could only get one thing right about Frankenstein, I think Mary would be proud that it was this part of her hideous progeny's tale. The brief, shining moment that gives a creature so cruelly rejected by his father the unconditional love he desperately craves. All storytelling is autobiography. I'm already deep in the weeds here. What more should I say? I have virtually no complaints about the first two-thirds of Frankenstein. I wish the last third was as good as what precedes it, but it hurtles toward the inevitable conclusion too fast to be emotionally satisfying. Confrontations and character deaths fly by, neither hitting as hard as they should. The creature and Victor come back together to irreparably hurt one another, only to immediately separate so Victor can chase the creature to the Arctic and close the loop on the narrative framing device. I wish there was more of Victor between his first attempted murder of the creature and when we find him again. I wish someone hadn't told Del Toro that they were running out of time or money or both and we could have gotten some version of the creature's aborted bride. Then, maybe, the cathartic ending Del Toro invents wholesale would feel more earned. I know why it's there. Del Toro is exorcising some paternal demons with this revised ending, granting the creature what he never receives in the novel, and that's fine. It almost works. Still, while I'm on board with Del Toro's other adaptive changes, I prefer Mary's original ending, where the bad dad dies unabsolved. I'm biased, though. I smiled when I got the news that my estranged biological father died because he went out of this world, knowing on some level that I never forgave him. Some fathers don't deserve reconciliation or forgiveness. I would count Victor Frankenstein among those devils, but this isn't my Frankenstein. It's Del Toro's. And clearly he is a markedly different man from the author of 19 years ago who wrote one of the most brutal endings in film history. He won't even know your name. All storytelling is autobiography. This story is eternal. To be a selfish parent is to create the lonely child who thinks themselves solitary, unlovable, monstrous. The creatures aren't the monsters of this story. Their creators are. Mary Shelley and Guillermo del Toro are kindred spirits. No one understands this the way they do. Their art, forever entwined now, is as much for them as it is for me. For my mother who sculpted that Boris Karloff bust and survived too much for her children, for my grandfather who loved James Whale's Frankenstein and died the week I last reread the novel, for my husband who loves these movies as much as I do and has seen the monstrous child in me who still lashes out sometimes and accepts me anyway. The lonely girl who grew into the mother she never expected to be is so very glad this Frankenstein exists. Now on Netflix, from the magnificent visionary mind of Guillermo del Toro comes Frankenstein, opening amid the howling winds and frozen silence of the North Pole. A ship and its crew, trapped in the solid ice, witness a sudden explosion out on the horizon. The captain sends men to investigate, and through the blizzard, they discover wreckage scattered across the tundra and a half-dead man lying in the snow. As they attempt to pull him to safety, a monstrous figure emerges from the storm and attacks with terrifying strength before disappearing back into the white void. The unconscious man is brought aboard, where the captain learns his name, Dr. Victor Frankenstein. Oscar Isaac. Delirious and dying, Victor warns that his pursuer still roams the ice, searching for him, and will stop at nothing to reach the ship. From his bed below deck, Victor begins to recount the events that led him there. His pursuit of the science of bringing life back to the dead began as both rebellion and obsession born of his emotionally abusive father and the devastating loss of his beloved mother, whose death he could not accept. At university, his reckless experiments got him expelled for the sheer madness of his work. Seeing potential, Victor is approached by the charismatic Baron von Seyfried, Christoph Waltz, who offers him funding and a secluded castle laboratory. The Baron is also the uncle of Elizabeth, Mia Goth, who was engaged to Victor's brother, William. Through sleepless nights and storms, Victor stitched together a body from the remains of the dead and harnessed lightning itself to give it life. The instant the creature, Jacob Elordi, opened its eyes, Victor felt not pride but horror. His creation was an imbecile. He decides to kill the creature by burning down the castle, but the creature survives, looking for Victor a broken bar but for revenge. Elizabeth and the creature share a haunting bond born from the wreckage of Victor's ambition. Frankenstein is one of the best movies of the year, thanks to the vision of its director, Guillermo del Toro. Even in the North Pole, once the film began, I was dropped into the immersive world of Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. From the ship stuck in ice, to the horrific experiments at university, to the castle and its lab, I'm sucked into this world. The first half of the film tells the familiar story of Victor Frankenstein with brilliant clarity. In this version, Victor is driven by obsession, and Oscar Isaac nails the performance. He has to conquer death, and when he discovers the creature he made, he is obsessed with making things right. The turn that Del Toro takes in this version is in the third chapter, where the story is now told from the creature's perspective. We follow his journey from the moment Victor tries to destroy him in the castle to meeting the old man and a girl, and making the final demand to Victor. The standout performance in this movie comes from Jacob Elordi as the creature. Unlike other productions, Del Toro finds the visual balance between creature and man. Elordi then runs with it, giving us the balance between a menace and a kind and thoughtful soul. Ultimately, Frankenstein is a visual feast that captures what I think are the themes Mary Shelley was aiming for in the tale, sans the Hollywood theatrics. The story is more poetic than narrative in the end. We'll see you at the Oscars. A broken bar will break your heart before it chills your bones. Mary Shelley's Frankenstein is one of the most renowned works of English literature and is considered by many to be one of the first science fiction stories. In the modern day, Frankenstein's monster is among the pantheon of iconic pop culture beasts, right up there with vampires and werewolves. Although the novel has been adapted to the screen dozens of times, the latest attempt comes with a degree of prestige attached, boasting a star-studded cast, an Oscar-winning director, and a blockbuster budget. 2025's Frankenstein more than delivers when it comes to entertainment value. This film is an absolute feast for the senses, only faltering a little when it comes to the plot. Frankenstein, a Netflix production with a limited theatrical release, was directed by Guillermo del Toro and stars Oscar Isaac as Victor Frankenstein. He's joined on the screen by Mia Goth as Lady Elizabeth Lavenza and Jacob Elordi as the creature. Supporting players include Charles Dance as Leopold Frankenstein, Christoph Waltz as Henrik Harlander, and Lars Mikkelsen as Captain Anderson. The film follows the storytelling and narrative structure of the source material, divided into a prelude and two further parts, focused on Victor Frankenstein and the creature respectively. What absolutely sells the film is the presentation. The film cost $120 million to produce, and you can see every cent on screen. Every frame oozes the pure gothic horror atmosphere that is present in the original text. The set design is immaculate, especially in Victor's laboratory and the barren Arctic shipwreck, and the practical effects used to create the creature and all the other monstrosities are extremely convincing. What's more, the cinematography is often awe-inducing, especially towards the end of the film. The performances in this movie are also excellent. Oscar Isaac might not be exactly how I imagine Victor Frankenstein, but he brings a level of grandiose energy to the performance that I really appreciated. Jacob Elordi was the real standout as the creature, both in his physical and emotional performance. I loved watching his character's slow growth as the creature learned and became more of his own person, especially during the scenes he shared with David Bradley's character. Although Mia Goth was good as Lady Elizabeth, having her also play Victor's mother, Baroness Clara Frankenstein, was a strange choice that fell a little flat. It's an interesting concept, to be sure, but we don't see Clara in enough detail or in enough scenes for it to make an impact. It feels very much like Guillermo del Toro had a specific reading of the text that he wanted to capture, but the film doesn't dive deep enough into Victor's relationship with his mother and how that colors his view of Elizabeth. The problems I have with this movie are entirely in regards to the plot. This isn't something that I noticed until late in the film. For the most part, I loved all the changes they made in the adaptation. Frankenstein having more of a relationship with the creature instead of outright scorning him was an interesting take that could have led to a more complicated dynamic in the rest of the film. But as the film progressed, I couldn't help but check the time and notice that we were coming up on the end of the movie, but we're not nearly at the end of the book's plot. The movie proceeds to cut almost the entire last act of the novel. We don't see Frankenstein attempt to create a female creature or marry Elizabeth. Instead, the film goes almost immediately from the creature's request for a companion to Elizabeth's death and then to Frankenstein's pursuit of his creature to the Arctic. Even so, the film still ends in a manner similar to the original text. Despite everything I love about the movie, I think this was a major misstep. I'm perfectly fine with changing things about a novel to suit it to another medium, but when an adaptation makes such a massive change, it has to commit to it. Del Toro should have modified the ending of the film to fit the new version of the story he was telling, a one where Frankenstein and his monster, even with everything that's happened, still have far less reason to hate each other than they did in the novel. I don't know if this would have improved the film, but it would have made the story more consistent. Still, I absolutely recommend this movie. Given their streaming focus, it's rare that Netflix makes something that deserves a theatrical experience, but Frankenstein is most definitely that. Anyone with an appetite for a spooky film this Halloween should put this movie on their radar. Post-production on Frankenstein began even as principal photography continued, following the contemporary practice of overlapping these phases to maximize efficiency and allow for ongoing creative adjustments. The film's 149-minute runtime required extensive work in editing, visual effects, sound design, and music composition to transform thousands of hours of footage and hundreds of component elements into a cohesive narrative. Editor Evan Schiff, working closely with Del Toro, faced the challenge of maintaining narrative momentum across the film's three-act structure while preserving the distinct character of each section. The opening prelude needed to establish mystery and dread without revealing too much about Victor or the creature's relationship. Victor's tale had to trace the protagonist's journey from grief-stricken son to obsessed scientist to horrified creator, while the creature's tale required shifting audience sympathies toward a character previously presented as monstrous. Schiff noted that determining when to introduce the creature and his full glory, when he should first appear in Victor's narrative before his own chapter begins, represented one of the most crucial structural decisions in the editing process. Visual effects supervision fell to Dennis Berardi, whose company Herne Hill Media, Mr. X, handled the majority of the film's extensive effects work. Despite Del Toro's preference for practical effects and in-camera techniques, Frankenstein still required approximately 1,200 visual effects shots. Berardi emphasized that Del Toro's mandate was for handmade realism of VFX that felt photographed, period-appropriate, and emotionally grounded rather than spectacular in an obvious way. The goal was always restrained. Effects should serve the story and protect performances rather than calling attention to themselves. The Arctic sequences required particularly complex effects work. While substantial portions of the ship were built practically, the surrounding ice landscape was entirely digital, as were all of the skies seen in these scenes. Visual effects artists had to create believable Arctic conditions that matched the lighting and atmosphere of the practical ship footage, ensuring seamless integration between the physical and digital elements. The bowsprit, masts, and sails were fully digital constructions that had to interact convincingly with wind, weather, and the mechanical movement of the practical ship section. For Victor's Edinburgh Lecture Hall demonstration, where he presents a reanimated half-corpse that catches a ball, the production combined animatronics with digital effects. Puppeteers operated a practical puppet on set, which Del Toro and Lostson photographed under dramatic lighting. Visual effects artists then removed the puppeteers, replaced sections of the puppet with digital elements, and enhanced details like the exposed brain. This hybrid approach, mixing the tangible presence of the practical puppet with the control and enhancement possible through CGI, exemplifies Del Toro's methodology throughout the film. The creature himself required only subtle digital enhancement in most shots, a testament to the quality of Hill's prosthetic work and Elordi's performance. Visual effects primarily focused on adding what Del Toro called a cat eye effect, a reflection from the back of the retina that made the creature's eyes glow when light hit them at certain angles. This naturalistic detail reinforced the creature as something simultaneously human and animal, familiar yet uncanny. Artists also refined the seams and grooves in the prosthetics where necessary, deepening shadows to emphasize the assembled nature of the creature's body without making these elements so prominent that they distracted from Elordi's performance. The most extensive digital work involved the creation and destruction of Victor's water tower laboratory. While miniatures provided a foundation, visual effects extended these practical elements to create the full environment of the clifftop setting, the surrounding landscape, The interior space is visible through windows, and eventually the tower's catastrophic collapse. More than 120 practical pyrotechnic events were photographed at high speed on the miniatures, providing real fire and debris. Digital fire was then added where needed to enhance these practical explosions, while digital set extensions expanded the scale of the destruction beyond what the miniatures could physically achieve. The production's approach to visual effects reflected Del Toro's belief that digital tools should be servants of storytelling rather than drivers of spectacle. In discussions with his VFX team, he emphasized story and emotion over methodology, insisting that effects needed to feel invisible even when they were omnipresent. As Berardi explained, "We wanted the audience to feel the drama of the moment, especially when they're watching wall-to-wall visual effects. It was all about restraint and protecting the performances. We respect texture, atmosphere and emotion before we get into spectacle." The visual effects work was divided among several studios, though Hernhill, Mr. X maintained primary oversight to ensure consistency. Del Toro's preference for working quickly meant that the in-house team at Hernhill, headed by Associate VFX Supervisor Brandon Schaafsma, could provide rapid turnarounds on designs, mock-ups, and test composites, often delivering work in hours or days rather than the weeks or months typical of larger facilities. ILM, Industrial Light Magic, contributed to specific sequences requiring their specialized capabilities, bringing their considerable technical expertise to bear on Del Toro's vision. Sound design and mixing occurred simultaneously with visual effects work, building the film's sonic landscape through layers of dialogue, Foley, ambient sound, and effects. Del Toro has always placed enormous importance on sound in his films, understanding that audio works subconsciously on audiences in ways that visuals cannot. The soundscape needed to support the film's emotional transitions from the howling Arctic winds of the prologue to the refined sounds of Victorian drawing rooms to the industrial clangor of Victor's laboratory to the primal sounds of the creature navigating wilderness. The musical score came from Alexander Desplat, who had previously collaborated with Del Toro on The Shape of Water and Pinocchio. Desplat was officially confirmed as composer in January 2025, though discussions and preliminary work had begun much earlier. In a May 2025 interview, Desplat described his approach: "Guillermo's cinema is very lyrical, and my music is rather lyrical too. So I think the music of Frankenstein will be something very lyrical and emotional. I'm not trying to write horrific music." This statement encapsulated the film's overall aesthetic strategy, approaching Gothic horror through romanticism and tragedy rather than through conventional fear and revulsion. Desplat's score was recorded at Air Lyndhurst Studios in London, utilizing a full orchestra to create the sweeping, emotionally resonant sound Del Toro sought. The score needed to reflect the film's period setting while feeling emotionally immediate to contemporary audiences, a balance Desplat achieved through his trademark combination of classical orchestration and subtle modern sensibilities. The music functions as another character in the narrative, commenting on the action without overwhelming it, supporting performances without indicating how audiences should feel.